Hi, and welcome to our lesson on the negative exponent property, a more advanced look. Okay, first of all, the definition. The power to which you raise the reciprocal of a number. That's the negative exponent property. That's kind of confusing, but we'll explain it in a minute. So if we say 4, which is your base, to the negative cubed, and that negative cubed is your exponent, that means that you raise or increase the reciprocal. There's the big key right there, reciprocal of 4 to the power of 3. So let's talk. What does reciprocal mean? It's dividing any number by 1. So if I start with the number 4, first thing that's a whole number, I need to make it into a fraction. So throw it over the number 1, ta-da, fraction. That works for any whole number. You take 4, divide it by 1, now it's a fraction. If you had 25, you divide it by 1, it's a fraction. So if I have 4 over 1 and I want the reciprocal, I'm just going to flip around. That's going to turn into 1/4. There's your reciprocal. So if you do the reciprocal of 1/4, that means that I am flipping this around. Since it's already a fraction, you don't have to stick it over 1. If I flip the location, it's 4 over 1 or just 4. In other words, you just flip the fraction upside down. That's how you find the reciprocal. So let's take a look at some examples. If you have -2 to the -3rd, first make it a fraction, and you do that by putting it over 1 to the -3rd. Now that negative sign on the exponent tells you that you need to find the reciprocal. In other words, flip it around. So you're going to take -1 over 2. This negative right here was an original one that was attached to the whole number, and it needs to stay with it throughout the entire equation or problem. Now this negative right here tells us reciprocal, and once we flipped it, it did its job and it's gone, and that 3 is left, and it's still attached to the 2. So you're going to have -1/2 3 times in a row, and it's negative every time. So if you have a negative times a negative, that's going to be a positive, and then a positive times a negative is going to be a negative. So 2 times 2 is 4, and 4 times 2 is 8. So that's all over 8. And -1 times -1 is +1, times -1 is a -1. So the reciprocal of -2 to the -3rd, or just -2 to the -3rd, is -1 over 8. Now what happens if you do this with a decimal? If you're going to have 0.25 -2, what they're actually saying is this is 0.25 is a 1/4. And they want to take it to the -2. So you're going to take 1 over 4 and find the reciprocal. Flip it over. Once you did that, the exponent is gone. Or sorry, the exponent's still there. The negative sign attached to the exponent is gone, and you're squaring it. So 4 times 4 is 16. So 0.25, which is a 1/4, to the -2 is going to be 16. All right, let's look at the next one. You've got 3 over 8 to the -2. If it's a negative, it means flip it upside down. So 8 goes to numerator and 3 goes to denominator. Once that happened, that negative sign is no longer there. He did his job, he's gone. But that exponent of 2 is still there. So 8/3 2 times in a row. So you have 8 to the 3rd times 8 to the 3rd. So you've got 8 times 8, which is 64. And then 3 times 3, which is 9. So it'd be 64 over 9. That's an improper fraction, and unless they tell you otherwise in a test or on homework or in an assignment, you can leave it as an improper fraction. If they tell you you have to convert it, then you're going to have to make it into a mixed number. Also, you need to check to see if you can reduce anything. And for this one, 3 would be the only number that could go into 9, and it doesn't go into 64 evenly. So this is reduced as far as it can go. Now the last one, they're going to say take the -6 over 5, so that negative stays with the 6/5, and do -4th power, which means find the reciprocal. So flip it upside down again. So you're going to have 5 over 6, and remember that negative stays with it. Once I flipped it over, that exponent negative, he did his job, he's gone. And now he turns positive. So you're really going to have negative 5 over 6 times negative 5 over 6, negative 5 over 6, and then one more time because they want you to do it 4 times in a row. All right? Now, if you're going to take negative 5 times negative 5 times negative 5 times negative 5, that's a big number, it's going to end up being 625. So you're going to end up with 625. And then 6 to the 4th, that's 6 times 6 times 6 times 6. That's going to be an even bigger number. It's 1,296. That's a proper fraction because the numerator is smaller than the denominator. You'd want to see if you can reduce this at all, and it turns out there is no number that's going to go into 625 and 1296 evenly. So this would be your final answer. All right, how does this work in algebra when we're talking about variables? Same exact way as it did with real numbers. If we're looking for the reciprocal of x, let's make it into a fraction, like that. Anything put over 1, you just made it a fraction. You're going to flip it upside down, so that's 1 over x. So the reciprocal of x is 1 over x. And then the same the other way. If I start with 1 over x, already a fraction, go ahead and flip it, and it turns into x. So the reciprocal of 1 over x is x. Let's do a problem or two. If I have x to the negative 3, that negative again is telling me I need to flip it. So x over 1 flips to 1 over x. And remember, you have that negative 3. Once it did the flip, the negative's gone, and the 3 remains. You can't do anything else with that because we don't know what x is. So x times x times x is still x to the 3rd. So your final answer is 1 over x to the 3rd. Now for here, we're going to take the entire quantity, negative x over 2, and take it to the negative 5th. That negative right there attached to the fraction stays there. It doesn't flip anything, it just stays attached. So you're going to take negative x over 2 and take it to the negative 5th, which means you have to flip the whole thing over. So 2 goes to the numerator, x goes to the denominator, and it's still a negative fraction. And once I did that, the negative attached to the exponent did its job and he's gone. Now I'm just going to take negative 2 over x 5 times in a row. So you're going to have 2 over x, and you're going to multiply it 5 times in a row. Now when you're multiplying any variables, you're not really multiplying them, you're adding up the total number of variables that you have. And there's another lesson that you can go to see how that works. So x times x times x times x times x is actually going to give you x to the 5th. Now you have to take 2 times 2, 2 times 2 times 2. So a negative times a negative is a positive, so that's 4, times negative is another positive, and then times a negative 2. So you've got 4 times 4 is 16, and then 16 times negative 2, you're going to end up with a negative number, and it's going to be negative 32. This is going to be your final answer. It's going to be negative fraction, a negative 32 over x to the 5th. Now, we're going to take 4 over x to the negative 2. That negative again is telling me flip everybody upside down, so the x goes to numerator, the 4 goes to denominator, and the whole thing needs to be squared. The minute I flipped it, that negative did its job and he's gone. So I'm just going to take x over 4 times x over 4. That's going to be x squared, and then 4 times 4 is 16. And then the last one. You're going to take negative 5 over x, the whole thing is negative, and you're going to find it to the negative 4th. Alright, that negative attached to the 5 stays there because it's part of the fraction. So when you flip it upside down, because that's what our exponent's telling us to do, keep that negative attached to the actual fraction. So it's going to be negative x over 5. Since I flipped it upside down, the negative on the exponent is gone. Now I just have to multiply this 4 times in a row. So I'm going to have x to the 5th negative, and I'm going to have to do that 4 times in a row. When you take anything, any variable, and you're multiplying it, you're actually adding it. So we're going to have 4 x's, which means it's going to be x to the 4th. And then if we take 5 times 5 times 5 times 5, you're going to get 625. Note I didn't write a negative sign because if you multiply a negative times a negative, you get a positive. If you multiply it by a negative, you get a negative. And if you take a negative times a negative, you get a positive. So it ends up to be a positive, x to the 4th over 625. So as a quick review, when you have a negative exponent for a fraction, it means to find the reciprocal of the original number, meaning flip it upside down. In algebra, you do the exact same thing as you do with normal numbers. And once you find the reciprocal, you drop the negative from the exponent only. So if the fraction is negative in the beginning, you got to keep that negative sign attached. If the exponent is negative, once you flip it upside down, get rid of that negative exponent and finish out your problem. And that's it for our lesson on negative exponent property.